Well, welcome back, everybody, to Vacuous Vocation. Today, joining me is Michael Wimer. Um, I know that you are the co-host and producer for Unreported with Thaddeus Russell, and a student of history, and a student of Unregistered Academy. But please, if you wouldn't mind sharing some words about yourself, Michael.
Yeah. Uh, I'll tell you how I got to Thad, at least, because I know that's probably what you want to come up with. I'm a drummer. I pretty much, since I was like 13 years old, spent most of my attention towards drums and playing drums. I always wanted to play in a band. And growing up, the people who were teaching me wanted me to play orchestral music, and I obliged them and got really into it after watching Stanley Kubrick movies at a young age. And, uh, to like justify this pursuit to my parents and make it something real, I went to music school right here, Indiana University, and graduated there in 2018. While I was there, I studied Latin percussion, Afro-Cuban percussion with a professor who was there. They had a really wide range program. Um, so I followed this professor who was also had no like formal training in music, who really taught himself by seeking out really good teachers on his own, and was a communist and a he had a bachelor's degree in poli science. So he always said that I'm the only person who couldn't get into this school who teaches here, which was really interesting. But yeah, anyways, I was researching the roots of music, the roots of rhythmic music, which goes to the Caribbean, which goes to Africa. And I'd always been interested in blues music. My dad took me to see B.B. King when I was 10, and I loved blues as the root of rock and roll music, which is what you'd hear on the radio all the time at the classic rock stations. Uh, so I had a deep appreciation of history, I guess. I was always a curious guy. And that brought me to Thad. Well, I heard about Thad because I watched his early appearances on Rogan, and as I was 18 at the time, and this was 2014, and he broke through. He was one of the first voices to break through a lot of the bullshit that was happening on college campuses. He was one of the first people to say, no, the KKK does not have a charter in Oberlin University. That there was all these hoaxes at the time, like lab equipment would be covered and people would see it from the windows and they think the KKK was meeting in like a science lab on
Hmm.
campus, or there was all these hoaxes at the time, and he was basically saying, no, the university is full of hysterical people who live inside their own heads and make up shit and have these insane narratives about race and whatnot. Uh, Also, he broke through a lot of the bullshit about uh, the sexual assault hysteria at the time. This was during uh, the Duke University, the Duke lacrosse team story was breaking through, and every college freshman would be inundated with like figures like 1 in 3 people will be sexually assaulted. And it was a very confusing time as a young person. Things about like affirmative consent, um, that you need constant vocal affirmation all the time, ongoing. I believe in consent. I believe in consent and all that, but I believe that it is possible for two drunk people to have sex with each other and nobody be raped. I think it's possible for people with disabilities to have sex with each other and there's no rape happening. I think, and a lot of the high profile things about sexual assault at that time were completely fabricated stories. So, anyways, as a young 18-year-old entering this world of hysteria that I had no idea existed and didn't make sense to me, uh, Thad broke through that and made the world a much less confusing place that I was entering in.
Hmm.
And I was always a little bit of a fan of his. And then I saw him reemerge in 2020 during the pandemic. He was doing Renegade University at the time, which is now Unregistered Academy, and he was doing a course on black music. well, not black music, just black history. A black history course with his friend Kamasi Hill, who was raised by revolutionaries and has made documentaries about that. Uh, and it was an amazing, fascinating, fun course. And I got sort of the historical roots of American music by way of that, in the same way that uh, I got the roots of other musics from my study at IU.
Hmm. Um, I'll tell you, I had a story with Thaddeus a little bit where I attended Occidental College
Oh yeah.
in 2016, and I thought he was still teaching there. So I emailed him like, "Hey, can I come to your office hours?" He's like, "No, I'm not there anymore." And he said, "But like, you should, join Renegade University." And at the I just started at Occidental, so I was like, "Oh yeah, like I can't, like I'm playing baseball here, like it's just I'm not gonna transfer." But yeah, I as well have been a fan of Thad quite a bit. His whole lecture in 2013 on like a renegade history on his book
Hmm.
really changed my life, I think, as far
Oh,
as like opening me up to the I guess the social battle between Puritanism and hedonism in a sense, or what he would call like the renegades for freedom.
mhm.
um that really like the whole concept of like why do we work and why do we place such a cultural emphasis on it was very, very enlightening, I think. But I think I've listened to almost all of you and Dad's unreported episodes. I'm a big fan of
Wow.
that.
Thanks, man. Thanks. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really look forward to them. You guys are doing a great job.
I appreciate that. That's really reassuring to hear. Yeah, it's
Yeah. Um well, excellent. I do want to, I guess, discuss with you like your thoughts on, I guess, culture or economics. I'm an anarchist, and I believe you're a fellow anarchist as well.
uh I mean, I'm less. I know Thad uses anarchistic as an adjective to keep evading being put into a box, and there's some utility in that. Um, I'm not as ideological as I used to be. I used to be full on ANCAP and like have a real hatred of the government and see them as the root of all the problems.
Hmm.
Uh, I think Thomas Massey is the only good member of Congress, and so that aligns me pretty libertarian-ish. But I don't get angry at the system as much as I used to,
Yeah.
and I don't try to impose a certain morality on everybody else that they're not going to abide by anyways.
Yeah.
Um,
I like that.
yeah.
I my professor, shout out Professor Darren Jurgen from Occidental, who is my mentor in Austrian economics and these kinds of ideologies, has like really emphasized like don't be negative, like don't be anti-state, like let's just discuss economics. And I think that's a more wholesome approach, because you can't really apply your morality on other people when they're not going to follow it. Like you're just going to like frustrate yourself more than anything, I think. So I
I,
think I like your perspective. Yeah, you don't need to. I guess I fall into the trap of identifying with anarchism quite a bit, more than I need to, perhaps.
for a while, I was
Yeah.
calling myself a Tolstoy anarchist.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
but I haven't read any Tolstoy, even though I love Dostoevsky. I haven't actually. I've read The Death of Ivan, but I haven't read anything beyond that, and
um,
that one essay. But
right now I'm working. I'm about a little past halfway in Michael Malice's The White Pill, and it's very,
yeah.
very interesting.
Mhm.
Um, I got to meet him at Mises U in 2018. He was the guest speaker. But I don't know. I'm curious because we're about the same age.
Yeah.
Your like dissident influences, like I
Uh,
mean, yeah.
I was okay. I was a fan of Alex Jones since like 2006, 2007.
Uh-huh.
Just as he was like this really entertaining guy who would talk about the Bush administration negatively and seemed very informed. Uh, at that time, it was hard to distinguish him from like Michael Moore in that
Uh-huh.
like the anti-Bush left was like saying some dissident things about 9/11 and saying some anti-war things that are libertarianish now. Uh, so that was like the first exposure to that. And then I got into hip hop, and I think Public Enemy was probably another thing that opened me to dissident politics. Um, yeah, being angry at the state, angry at the government, calling the government gangsters. That's all from
Hmm.
Public Enemy. Um, I didn't. I'm not so keen on the racial stuff anymore, but the anti-white or just like the black man against the system thing is like something that any rebellious young man can identify with.
Hmm.
Uh, and then I got into Stefan Molyneux. Oh, Public Enemy, and then Stefan Molyneux at like 14. This was like 2010. I really liked Obama when I was 12 years old at the time, but I really liked Obama in 2008. And I'm like, I saw him as the great hope and savior, and like, essentially, he's the fulfillment of liberalism, and things will actually get better once he gets elected. And then Alex Jones's documentary, The Obama Deception, where he got people like Professor Griff and people from the hip hop community to criticize Obama from the left in that documentary and say, no, he's not going to end all the wars. Actually, he was planted there to continue the wars and get popular support for them. And this was 2009. I'm like, oh, that remains to be seen. And then it totally played out the way that Alex Jones laid out it would in that documentary. Like,
Hmm.
Obama turned Bush's two wars into seven. And so that sort of, you know, that made me start questioning the electoral process and if there's any hope with that. Uh, and then, so yeah, I got into Stefan Molyneux, um, who was just framing himself as a philosopher. I listened to Pink Floyd at the time also, and Roger Waters' anti-war lyrics are super piercing, and uh, yeah, another brick in the wall, another like thing that any young man can identify with: the feelings of isolation, uh, and the feelings of antagonism with the school and the war system and the state supporting the war system. Uh, but yeah, I think it was Molyneux um, who like first presented a hypothesis of like a total philosophical world vision of anarchism that I was exposed to when like I forget what it's called, uh, but he had one video that was super viral that was edited with stuff from Pink Floyd's The Wall and maybe some stuff from Animal Farm. I read Orwell. I read Animal Farm in 1984 at that time too, and the more I got informed on history, the more I saw governments just murdering tens of millions of people, and just the orientation of the government as the bad guys seemed pretty obvious for me from then on out.
Hmm. Yeah, that's um, I guess it's interesting how for me as well there was like an episode of just diving into more like the democide and the darker parts of like the 20th century that is really in a way illuminating to like the nature of governments and states. And I don't know, like I think, well, I don't know. I guess uh what is your current perspective on American politics in the modern age, from the system to the people, I guess the typical American ideology towards politics.
Um, I think I am pro America. I like America, but I like America as a constitutional republic. Um, and those values, I think, are pretty much gone. They're not taught anymore. Uh, After the World War II and after the Civil Rights Movement, the values of a constitutional republic aren't taught anymore. What's taught is uh, uh, this universal liberalism, neoliberalism, and empire, where uh, we have to go forth through all stretches of the world and enshrine liberal values everywhere and ensure that every single human being has the same rights granted to them. Uh, where the American tradition that I see is a voluntary republic of states that support the federal government, that the government gets its power from the consent of everybody beneath it. And as soon as, for example, a state wants to secede or doesn't think that their power is justified, then they can't exercise superseding power over that. It's a system built on consent that goes all the way up. Um, I So I see no hope in Washington D.C. I see no hope in either Donald Trump or Biden, especially after this foreign aid package that Donald Trump was
Mm.
instrumental in helping pass. He met with Speaker Johnson and created all these little uh, conditions of the bill to make it more popular with people who are America first and make it seem like it's a win for them, but really it's just the same omnibus foreign spending that we've had forever. I think Washington, D.C. is probably just trying to loot the Treasury at this point and just extract as much free printed money to their cronies as they can before the system itself collapses.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Um, I was just in DC like earlier this month. I was doing like a gap year program for 1 month,
Mm-hmm.
and like I don't know, it was very enlightening for me to kind of just see like the buildings themselves and how they're kind of like built in a theological sense, right? Like they
Oh
have
yeah,
to appear grandiose in order to like pass as being legitimate. But I mean, there's really like no one impressive in DC, I would say, who's like, you know what I mean? Like, do you know what I mean?
yeah. There's like Obama was an impressive campaigner, an impressive speaker, but there was no substance behind what he had. He could speak calmly and have the air of leadership, but he wasn't super informed or had a vision really. It's really
Yeah,
falling apart. Uh,
yeah.
I
It's
think,
the
yeah,
air, yeah, that
yeah.
like of calm leadership and superiority,
Mhm.
but it's like not backed by like rigorous, you know, reasoning, I guess, other than like the neoliberal imperialism.
Yeah, Thad talks about this a lot, that the liberals aren't impressive anymore, that they used to like be intellectuals that like wrote all the great books and had a vision of the future. But yeah, not so much anymore, mostly because they're walled off in either universities or Washington, D.C. itself, where the party politics system is so insular that it's impossible to get somebody from outside their view. So they never have to confront outside opinions, and they never have to justify what they're doing against actual dissidents. Uh, Also, it's like octogenarian boomers who are just clinging on to power. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, again, Thomas Massey is the only person in DC that seems to be doing his job and seems,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me ask you this. Where do you see the future direction of this country? If you think it's headed towards national divorce, I don't know, like the economy itself, what do you think?
It is possible that it goes on forever. I don't know, not forever, but like I don't think it's stupid to invest in the S&P 500, for example, which is like I think because like the United States has such great geographical advantages, like we'll never be invaded and we have these oceans, and we're already the cultural superpower, that things just keep chugging along one way or another, that some form of capitalism will be preserved and it will keep working out, and that these companies literally are too big to fail and they'll keep running everything. It is possible that we collapse like the Soviet Union did, in that the empire becomes unsustainable, and Texas and or California, for whatever political reasons of their own, see an encroachment of the federal government as too far and choose to just voluntary secede, and the United States military will be incapable and unwilling of stopping that. Um, Especially if it's California. Uh, but yeah, same thing with Texas. It's yeah, just a voluntary secession. I see that as something that might actually happen, especially as things get more and more polarized. And then yeah, hopefully the system looks more like it did in the Articles of Confederation or in the early days
Hmm.
of the Republic. I don't see like a big catastrophic collapse or a civil war happening, though.
Yeah. Uh, I am a big fan of like the next major step of human freedom coming with a monetary revolution,
Oh
in
yeah,
the separation of state and money. Yeah. What do you think?
uh, that's huge right now. You see, Zimbabwe just passed a
No.
gold-backed currency. Zimbabwe's doing a gold-backed currency. All
Wow.
the BRICS nations are experimenting with their currencies. El Salvador, right, with Bukele, is doing
Uh-huh.
Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin might be adopted by governments, and for the early anarchists who thought Bitcoin was like the future of evading governments, I don't think that's the case. I think it's going to be a really good tool for governments because every transaction is recorded on the blockchain and is very easy to follow. And like the whole verification process comes with, oh, this wallet gave money to this wallet, you know,
Sure. But
and
doesn't it limit the government's ability to print money?
it does. And so it might be a sustainable, prosperous future if a state adopts it. It might be prosperous for the state, yeah.
Hmm.
But if you're trying to destroy the state and live in anarchy, uh, it might it might be counterproductive for that.
Yeah. I don't know. I do think it is very limiting on governments, and so they will have to restrict their like what they currently do, right? Like, I do think a lot of the worst things in society right now come from the state's ability to print money, from like military industrial complex to the universities, and what they're producing to the media. Um, yeah, I think that comes from the current monetary system.
Yeah, yeah. The endless gravy train of free money, and I mean, the biggest problem with the Federal Reserve is that it's used to bankroll endless wars. Um,
Hmm.
like, yeah, the Federal Reserve, right? It was before World War One, right? They bankrolled World War One. They we got off the gold standard, uh, like towards the tail end of Vietnam. Uh, and yeah, if you can spend unlimited money, then you can have unlimited wars. And so yeah, Bitcoin could stop that. And yeah, and lead to a more prosperous voluntary government that doesn't try to intercede in whatever's happening oceans away.
I think that is gonna lead to national divorce
Mhm.
and secession. I think we're gonna see that in our lifetime.
Yeah. Uh, who is it? Like, yeah, certain mayors are doing Bitcoin programs like in Miami and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And yeah, I think adopting a currency other than the US dollar and the US dollar eventually collapsing, uh, it's been held up because it's used as an export and like because it's thinned out in so many different places that the consumer doesn't feel the inflation of there being so many more dollars. But that can't happen forever.
Right.
And yeah, I think people will become more prosperous as they adopt voluntary economic principles, and then the power will be there. And so it's a choice of the government to co-opt it in some way, uh, be it a
Hmm.
central bank digital currency or uh, just adopting Bitcoin as the national currency.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, like, is there a topic you would like to discuss or?
uh, Huh. You said philosophy, right?
That I study.
Yeah. Or
I
when
study,
yeah,
yeah, economics primarily.
economics. Yeah. Is your professor an Austrian?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. At Occidental,
Mhm.
he's an Austrian, but this is his last semester at Occidental because Occidental is unfortunately getting rid of him because they're, very much socialist minded and
Uh-huh.
don't want a professor teaching free market economics, but he's the best. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I went to Spain to study with Huerta de Soto and Philip Baggis, who are also Austrians as well.
Wow.
So with my professor Jurgen at Occidental, he was an anarchist Austrian economist, and then like six of the seven professors I had in Madrid were like anarchist Austrian economists, and Huerta de Soto said I'm the luckiest student in the world, and
Wow.
I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. Who is it at Loyola? New Orleans.
Oh, Walter Block.
Walter Block. Yeah. So that's like the only other American. Oh, there's a couple, right? But yeah, you're super lucky. Um,
I am, yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, Jurgen is the best. It's so unfortunate Occidental is getting rid of him. The students love him. Like the students there got a whole petition together and almost like 400 people signed it, including alumni, parents of alumni, grandparents of alumni. Like because of you, I can have a conversation with my grandchild and like they're interested in ideas and it was
Wow.
beautiful. And Occidental just sucks. They're shooting themselves in the foot. So.
Yeah. Was there any complaints about him formally, or
You know what? There was no complaints from students.
yeah?
Like the students love him. His class fills up. There's always students on the wait list. All the other econ classes are like trying to get students in. But the another professor was like trying to put a complaint in on him. But that's it. And it's like it's all just
It's
stupid.
funny because like economics is so esoteric. Like for somebody to know what an Austrian economist is and like how that differentiates from Chicago economics and like I think normally in the field of economics, at least at the undergrad level, you're not really supposed to impart a particular ideology. You're just supposed to train them in what the school of thought is that's out there, right? Like,
I mean, I'll say this because I
uh-huh.
think Yarvin has stated that like for every 20 neoclassical Keynesian economists, there's like one Chicago school economist, and for every 10 Chicago school economists, there's like one Austrian economist.
Yeah.
And then, you know, at Occidental, and I think a lot of liberal arts and modern universities teaching economics, like they went through the textbook and counted how many examples are males using males and females, and they said, well, this is like unequal. There's more males than females, so we got to like replace the textbook. So they brought in like a textbook written by like a woman on Obama's cabinet, and then the first chapter is like market failures. And
Hmm.
so it's all like now ideologically driven to justify government intervention in everywhere in the economy. So it's really it's I mean even like my Spanish class, the teacher's like, you know why you're here to teach for
Hmm.
us to teach you communism is really what she was saying. So it is purely ideologically driven. Yeah.
Yeah. The liberal like AP US history and like the AP courses, you could totally tell that they're there to make you Hillary Clinton. Like they're there like the arc of history is government intervention saved the day, and here are the new institutions like NATO and the United Nations. And uh yeah, I got you on your camera.
Yeah, yeah.
The new institutions like NATO and the United Nations, these are the places that you will work at where you will come up with new solutions to intervene and save the day again.
Hmm.
Uh yeah, the idea that doing nothing is often that which governs least is that which governs best. That things will sort themselves out if you just let people do it. It's never entertained. Or yeah.
You know what? I remember as a freshman in high school, I took MUN, Modeled United Nations, and it was with like the other freshmen. And like I didn't understand like what we were doing, you know what I mean? But we're modeling being like different nations coming up with policies to like help people with AIDS across the world, or like the you know the the war in Yemen or something. Not even that. It was like, what should we do with like the atrocity of women in Yemen and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Young women can't go to school in Yemen, so it's now our responsibility to do something about that. Yeah.
yeah, and it totally trains you to be like supremely interventionist without even the consideration of like the means and ends of
Hmm.
going about it. And what's it called? The gay agenda, not the gay agenda, but the
Global
gayification
homo.
of global homo. Yeah, it's amazing that that is just like that is what they want. I guess.
Yeah. It's hubris too. It's the ultimate hubris, and like even if you screw things up, you were doing the best you could with what you had knew at the time, and so you're justified, and you can't be looked at poorly for what you did interventionist wise. Yeah, I think a lot of my anarchist tendencies now just come from a place of humility and saying I don't know how young girls should get an education in Yemen. That's a culture with their own dynamics that is totally apart from me, and it's none of my business.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah. I've been really thinking about what Thaddeus mentioned on one of your guys' episodes with like Robert Kagan and his book on like the roots
Dangerous
of
Nation,
imperialism.
I think it's
Yeah, I
called.
mean, I haven't read it, or yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I need to read that too. I think it's called Dangerous Nation, and that might be what Thad called his first course on the history of United States interventions. Uh, yeah, it's basically saying that from the very beginning, the United States was an imperialist project, or that the founding fathers wanted things to be imperialist. Like they always looked for expansion, they always wanted to be an empire. They probably had an inferiority complex from the colonies and wanted
Hmm.
to show England that they could do what they do even better. That's probably it. Like they believed in the civilizing uh, role of of Anglo Puritan culture and the work ethic, and unused land must be used, and it better be used by us smarter people, and we're going to spread enlightenment everywhere we go. And if you look at how the United States always behaves, that's pretty much the case. I need to do my reading on the War of 1812, but I think Scott Horton said something about it being a failed imperialist venture to conquer Canada.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't know much about that war.
yeah, but
Uh,
there isn't a single piece of American foreign policy that I kind of agree with. I think it's all been expansionist, and there's truth to that. But still, I think it's antithetical to the constitutional republic that it's supposed to be, or at least, yeah, the federalist tradition of a constitutional republic that should be, and that it was popularly like every election, anti-interventionism wins popularly pretty much. Like Americans have to really be convinced with atrocity propaganda to get behind a war. Americans' instincts throughout history have been, no, we're doing great over here. We don't need to save those people over there.
hmm. Um, so in the modern times, I guess, as America was this imperialist expansionist project, I think Thad made the point that like now it's kind of changing. Like even Biden is not as
No, his point is that the, there aren't any true believers left. That Biden isn't very bright, and he doesn't have like an ideology to justify what he's doing in Ukraine and Israel.
hmm.
That it's just upholding the status quo because that's just what it is. Um, there doesn't seem to be a clear plan, and it seems very self-destructive and not self-aware. Somebody like Henry Kissinger, for example, a pragmatist, would have very clear, concrete goals. Like, we are going to bomb the shit out of Cambodia because these people are there. We're going to do it with total force, and we're going to win this war immediately. Just heartless, but totally justified, like thought out rationalizations of what they're doing. And I think the modern people in power are just running by hubris and sunken cost fallacy, in that they can't admit that they were wrong and they can't admit that they're doing more harm than good. So they have to keep doubling down on what they've been doing.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I hope I think, what's really interesting is like how the military enrollment rates are super low
Yeah.
and how like modern Americans just in a way I maybe it's because of like the global connection through technology and the internet and social media that we just kind of can recognize other people around the world as also just people
Hmm.
and don't need to go fight really anyone. I hope that energy continues to like devolve, right? Like you mentioned this too, how
Uh-huh.
Gen Z is like just like so apathetic towards war.
Yeah.
Um,
With the military enrollment, I think the big story on that is conservatives. There's a lot of them, but conservatives don't believe in institutions anymore. Um,
hmm,
like, I think that was the big thing accomplished with Trump, is that the FBI was weaponized against him, and now they don't trust the FBI anymore. Um, Everybody should watch the Clint Eastwood film Richard Grove
hmm,
about 1996 Olympics. There was a bomb discovered by a security guard, and that security guard was framed for planting the bomb there. And it's all about how the media and the FBI conspired to lie against this good American citizen who just believed in our institutions and believed that the FBI would never go against a good man. And this was
wow,
during, it came out, I think, during Trump's first impeachment case, where the media and the FBI were going after him.
wow.
And yeah, you see just the roots of conservatives not believing in the institutions like they used to. Uh, with another thing which historian I follow a ton, Brian McClanahan, talks about is Confederate generals and Confederate namesakes of things are being taken off of United States military areas. So warships and bases named after Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson or something uh, lose their namesakes, and monuments are being taken down. And the reconciliation that happened after the Civil War is being undone. And so the young, well, the Southern families that have fought for generations for America and saw the Civil War as their version of the American Revolution. They saw themselves as following in Thomas Jefferson's footsteps. Those families feel antagonized by uh, their history being erased, and the reconciliation after the war being undone. That these symbolic gestures to them mean that they'll fight and die for the ideals they believe in, and then they'll just be erased and forgotten
Hmm.
and won't be treated with respect. Uh, that's a big thing. If you watch how the National Guard was treated during Biden's inauguration, that upset a lot of people. That yeah, the National Guard brought in after January 6th to shut down Washington D.C. and basically protect all these people in power, and then they were just like stationed in parking garages and giving like prison sandwiches and
Hmm.
just treated like totally subservient and not really honored. Uh, that's a big thing. Uh, and yeah, the Ukraine war is so removed from Americans, and same thing with Israel Palestine, that like it just doesn't. Americans aren't informed enough to care one way or the other. So why the case can't be made to them why they should go somewhere for that.
Yeah. And I mean, man, you guys do an excellent job covering the Ukraine war and like
Thanks.
I know that points to the Durant. I haven't watched the Durant, but I've
Mhm.
gotten a lot about it from like you and like Dave Smith, um, and how just like the State Department produces all the Putin phobia or like Russia phobia and
Oh
makes him
yeah.
like this evil guy who, you know, wants to take over all of Europe, very similar to like Hitler. But
Hmm.
but then you just ask like why and how and like where does he ever say he wants to do that? And he said like he asked to join NATO and he doesn't have the economy to take over Europe and it's just so aggravating because I'll just say
Hmm.
this when I was in DC like we met with these guys who are like really top I guess in politically connected and they're just like actually we had this meeting in this guy's living room who said this is the room the CIA was founded in,
Ooh.
so it was like really a little bit eerie, but I brought my points that I have taken from you and Thad and Dave, and they're just like they just don't have an argument. They're like we need to just support Zelensky, and like it's just so stupid, and yeah, it's sad.
This is a big thing. Myth making in history. Uh, the myth of World War II
Hmm.
looming over everybody's heads, and that's like a founding myth that. And Curtis Yarvin points to this, that the thought at the time, or how the war was justified, was that Hitler is a German, and the Germans are a horrible warlike people, and every time they unite, they try to take over the world, and this is just the latest reincarnation of it. Uh, but the myth that we get now from World War II is: would you rather be a Chamberlain, or would you rather be Neville Chamberlain, or why am I blanking on the more famous guy's name? Churchill. Would you rather be Chamberlain or Churchill? Uh, where Neville Chamberlain allegedly gave Hitler everything he wanted, ignored him encroaching on the rest of Europe, and Winston Churchill just joined the fight and militarized and saw Nazi Germany as a real threat and suppressed it and stopped it. And Thad does this way better than me as a history professor, but he argues that no, actually, the best thing to do, Neville Chamberlain was right. Hitler never posed a threat to England. Hitler wanted to take over a large part of Eastern Europe, but he never wanted to go after the territory that's the UK now. He never wanted to cross the ocean because he knew that the British Navy was too big and he saw them as their own empire. He never wanted to conquer the United States. Philip K. Dick is brilliant, but the man in the high castle is just, there's no world I see where Japan or Germany consequentially invades the United States. Um, yeah, so the myth that you have to stop evil with great force, otherwise it will fester and win and take over the world, is how every other uh, intervention is like framed. Also, that post Holocaust, the Holocaust wasn't a concern during World War II, but after World War II, it was used to paint Germany as inherently evil, and we did something great by stopping the Holocaust. The people who were fighting World War II weren't concerned with that. Um, but
So yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
Uh,
regarding oh sorry yeah
Real
please
quick,
continue.
I just want to say that like if you look at how Saddam Hussein was talked about, or how Gaddafi was talked about, or how all these dictators that the United States have taken out were talked about, it's always Hitler. It's always he's uh, bombing his own people. He's mass murdering his own people. And if we don't stop him, he'll take over the whole region. And if we don't stop that, he'll take over the world. Uh,
Yeah. So regarding World War II, because I've heard this point from Yarvin, but I'm just I guess a little bit confused in that myth making because and I think a lot of people are aware it's like if stopping the Holocaust wasn't the reason for America getting involved in World War II, what was the reason that America got involved?
uh, so Thad talks about this a lot. that for geopolitical reasons, FDR has wanted to invade Japan ever since he was in middle school. That Japan posed strategic importance to the United States. I'm not too equipped to talk about that right now, off the bat, but it's mostly about yeah, money and power and reframing Europe, uh, destroying the old world and remaking it in a way that's united and aligned with the United States interests. Um, and again, uh, the best books to read on this are Human Smoke by Nicholson Baker, where he just, like a journalist, outlines different pieces of information that happened at the time, and from a hippie peacenik perspective, says basically the Allies committed a ton of atrocities and war was not the way to go. I was really into Howard Zinn also growing up, like as I got more into anarchy, and he was anti-interventionist in World War II as well. So there's a big history of the left of being a peacenik who's anti-death, that hates Nazis and hates right-wing authoritarianism, that it was anti-intervening in World War II. Uh, and then from the right, Pat Buchanan's book, Hitler, Churchill, Roosevelt, I think, in The Unnecessary War or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it was basically to remake Europe in a way that strategically aligned with the United States interests.
Mm.
That's what the people way up top thought about it, but the way it was sold to the citizens, and this is what Yarvin talks about, is that there's a if you analyze propaganda, it's a race war. That there's the eternal Hun that's out there, and bucktooth Japanese people who are monkeys who just want to kill, 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 and we have to kill them before they kill us and everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. That as far as the propaganda is really interesting because I do think that technology is kind of saving or enlightening us to like reality more than like, what propaganda can. But I recently when I flew back from DC, okay, so I want to say this. I'm kind of changing subjects, but you guys really got me interested in Jack the Perfume Nationalist. And and then also from Jack, he got me into like the Red Scare podcast.
Mhm.
And I think those are also two great podcasts. But on my flight back from DC, I watched Zone of Interest because you guys were talking
Mhm.
about it, and then like Anna and Dasha had a podcast on it, and yeah, that movie was okay. I was kind of like in and out of
It's like
that.
a museum piece more than it is a movie. It's
Yeah,
like something that you would see like in a room in a museum, and then like it could have been a half hour and you would have gotten the point of it, you know.
yeah, yeah. It was a little bit eerie, I guess, but it was cool. But now I'm a big fan of. I haven't listened to too much of the Perfume Nationalist, but Anna and
Mhm.
Dasha, they're really cool.
Yeah, and that movie's produced by A24, who
Yeah,
like is like the last studio like making movies with good craft behind them,
yeah,
like interesting concepts, avant-garde ideas, and yeah.
um, yeah,
Did you want to talk about culture from there?
sure, yeah, yeah. Let's
With
do it.
with Jack, being anti-Puritan, being, being this gay Trump supporter that like longs for yeah.
I'm a big fan of his. I do love his idea, and this is one of like the first. I mean, I haven't listened to the unfolding
Mhm.
story of the Perfume Nationalist, but the idea that like a sense was part of your autonomy or your your character and image in the world that has been kind of taken away
Yeah,
from like the war on sense is very fascinating to me.
especially during COVID, uh, it was a great way to like reassert your individuality when you're forced to be matched up in public. Um, it was a first of all, it was a pleasurable thing, like when you're bored out of your mind, and to smell something and derive pleasure from it, and follow like what do I like, and what would I like on somebody else, and where would I like it? But yeah, scent is something that's mostly gone in the world. It's come back a lot. I think young people wear a lot of perfume, and I think Jack has a huge influence on that. I think vaporwave has a huge influence on that. Yeah, COVID, it being a hobby that picked up during COVID, has an influence on that. Yeah, sensuality. He talks about it arriving from smoking bans, in that when smoking was taken away from public places, that's when the nanny state sort of won culturally, and the whole world was taken away from pleasure and taken towards safetyism, and everything has to be sterile and lacking character, and this scent of a plant that built this country is gone from all public rooms, and people aren't lively like they used to be. I sympathize with boomers and Gen X's who felt like they were drowning in cancer. I get it, but something was really lost from that, and that conservatives are the real anti-Puritans is something that he derived from that, because it was conservatives who led the charge against that. I'm in Indiana, and Indiana's Mike Pence, when he was a radio host and a columnist, would write columns about how the nanny state is coming for your cigarettes. And Rush Limbaugh, who was probably just aping Archie Bunker from television,
Mhm.
from All in the Family, was chomping on cigars and chomping about the graces of tobacco. And yeah, the world got a lot more dead. It got a lot less pleasurable. It got a lot less social when the smokers were kicked outdoors and adults weren't allowed to do something dangerous on the recreational time in public.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I wish I was a bit older to like see the liveliness, right? Of like, because I can totally conceptualize what you mean, how like the world is like more dead. I think, man, I really hate the whole
Well,
COVID regime.
I've had friends who've gone to Europe, and I think like in parts of France and Germany, there's still clubs where people smoke inside, and they've just the atmosphere of it. They've always admired. Spain as well, like flamenco
Yeah.
clubs, just part of the culture being filled with smoke. And then there was a thread on Twitter recently where they talked about ambience in sports photography. Like there's this blue cloud in all the photography, and that's actually smoke, and it makes everything look like it was lit by dry ice, and it looks way more consequential. So
Hmm.
just the atmosphere of it, yeah.
I want to know what you think about this. And I think it is influenced by a lot of what Fed has taught, but how the mask wearing during COVID,
Hmm.
was depersonalization. Your face is like your profile picture, like that's what it's used for ID. So it's the most personal part about you. And then to cover it up,
Oh yeah,
removes your face. Like,
yeah. So
we
it's
communicate through eyes
real
and
quick
our
to
mouth.
connect it to scent. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
scent was a way of reclaiming that. It was a way of pushing your personality onto the world and being felt by other people. Like
Hmm.
whether they literally acknowledge it or not, they can smell you. You're drowning the
Hmm.
room out, and you're asserting who you are onto the world. So
Yeah.
that's what was reclaimed by that.
And it's unspoken.
Hmm.
And so it's like you don't have to like say anything other than actually take up that space and exist for people to acknowledge your existence.
Hmm.
But the whole war on COVID, I think, was this form of like neoliberal communism where it was very depersonalizing. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, low status people were able to like feel, more important by reducing everyone to like this depersonalized thing, I guess.
it's literally Maoism. Like Mao would enforce uniforms, like to where you can't tell the gender of the person in whatever
Hmm.
regiment. Uh, and yeah, individuality is looked as bourgeois, and their ideal world is everybody is just safe little units that don't express anything that is just part of the collective will and the greater good.
Right. And then I would understand like the neoliberals and like actual communists who like
Hmm.
support the COVID regime for those regards, but like then you have like the boomer cons who then are also like encouraging people to mask up because they're concerned for their own health and safety, not even realizing that they're like um pretty much acknowledge like or like supporting that aspect
Oh,
of yeah.
this is myth making about history. In real time this happened. It was a way for people to feel like they were on the right side of history. It was a way for people to do absolutely nothing at all and feel like they were fighting the good fight and making the world a better place and overcoming this global insurmountable challenge when really they were just making the world worse for everybody.
Yeah. So I hope I don't know what's gonna happen with that and like
Oh, but
yeah
again, the thought never occurs to anybody that maybe we should just do nothing. Or, like, maybe we shouldn't freak out and overreact. That the impetus to do something usually leads us to make a decision with bad information, and maybe we should wait for cooler heads to prevail before going full steam ahead on something.
well that's the whole point right of like the climate crisis as well as like no it's urgent
Hmm.
so we need to make a decision right now
Yeah.
like don't think about it.
Yeah. The climate thing is weird because, like, you really have to brainwash yourself to believe in it. Like, I mean, you have to. I just mean, like, you have to do a ton of reading and a ton of abstract thinking to think the world is going to end. You either have to be, like, bullied into it by somebody. Like, there's a lot
Hmm.
of convincing. Like, it's not something that you. It might be correct that that's what the climate science is and that things actually are that dire, but it's not something that you observe in your day to day life. Um,
Yeah, it does seem existential in the sense that like, you know, you can say I'm an environmentalist and I love trees and like icebergs.
mhm.
And then to deny climate change means like you hate trees and you hate icebergs
Yeah,
in a way. And so like puts you in this like position of being a destructivist of nature, which sounds horrible. So it's like easy to identify with being an environmentalist.
mhm. Yeah, there's a big tension with that of old school environmentalists going against modern climate change people, like saying you're hijacking our entire movement. We just want cleaner water and cleaner air. You guys are lobbing this onto a bigger political agenda of taxing and controlling everything of the economy when we just want less pollution, less, yeah, a more
Yeah.
conservation of species and stuff.
And I do think the back door for communism in this country would come from like the climate agenda because like climate is like everything. I mean,
Hmm.
in my car or having a conversation with someone, it's like what's the atmosphere of the room of the climate? So it's like, well, if we can, you know what I mean? It's very existential where it's like, oh, we need to take control of the climate. So we're gonna insert ourselves into every aspect of your life to fight for the climate, you
Yeah.
know?
Everything emits energy, everything emits carbon. Like it's life itself. It's a war on life itself. It's like a breathing tax. It's like a
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. It's man. And so I guess in that sense it's very relatable to like the COVID regime of just being like urgent and dire and the right side of history.
Hmm.
But I guess what was really fascinating was so as I was in DC, the director of the program I was in, the John Locke Institute, Martin Cox, was like we were having a conversation and he studied politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford. And he's like, you know, like the more I study philosophy, the more I come back to economics.
Mm.
And I do think that that is like as Thomas Sowell said, everything's a trade-off. So it's like for the COVID, for the climate, what's going to be the trade-off that no neoliberal wants to acknowledge?
Hmm.
Um, and it's freedom, I think.
Yeah. Uh I want to ask you about that. Like a lot of people see Austrian economics as goofy because it's all uh principles, a priori principles that you have to adopt or acknowledge or see as true. as opposed to like
Hmm.
Chicago school, which is just like, oh, freedom builds more prosperity as evidenced by all these governments that liberalized and allowed for more free markets. They got richer, they got more prosperous. Um, yeah. Uh, is there like a more explicit connection to philosophy that you feel, or
With
Mhm.
with Austrian
Yeah?
economics? Well, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think like the history of Austrian economics alone is the history of economic thought. And I mean, the ideas get traced back to like Lao Tzu and
Hmm.
Taoism in like 300 BC. And then, even with Aristotle, and then with like the Spanish scholastics in the 16th century and like the French physiocrats of the 18th century. And they're all kind of trying to discover and arrive at the ideas of social cooperation. And I think that's what Mises he would basically say economics is a synonym for social cooperation. So from that aspect, I think everyone's trying to understand like how is it that we can have cooperation that leads to peace and prosperity with the political means kind of being antithetic to social cooperation, like exploitation and looting and destructionism, socialism, like it's all kind of that other social battle between like capitalism and socialism, I think. I think that's kind of the philosophical perspective that is still yet being uncovered in real time. Um, for me, I think what I study, right, my topic, the economics of suicide, it's like if economics is social cooperation, what is limiting people from being able to cooperate with one another? Because then you're having this effect of suicide, and there's many reasons why people kill themselves.
Hmm.
But if people are like isolated to the point of taking their own life, like my research is saying like why are these people not able to cooperate within their society and so I think that suicide in that aspect becomes the job of the economist and that becomes very existential in that regard. So I think economics basically is foundational to a philosophical perspective
Hmm.
in my opinion.
Yeah. This is like the meaning crisis, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
uh,
Yeah, and yeah, yeah, I don't want to cut you off.
uh, yeah. I was also really into Jordan Peterson when he had his first run. Like, post Benzo, Jordan Peterson, not so much, but pre Benzo, Jordan Peterson was great. um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah. He would talk about like you can have a phone book, right? And that's the most true book that exists. It's just a book full of nothing but facts, but you can't really do anything with it until you have like a higher purpose. Um, like science essentially tells you the what of the world, but doesn't tell you the how or the why, and you need something deeper.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess going back to like Austrian economics, I mean, there is a lot of it like that is kind of like I don't really care much about like banking philosophy, although it's important and monetary theory, but like Austrians need to I think concern themselves more like Mises and Hayek did with psychology and sociology, and
Hmm.
not be afraid to discuss these topics. But economists have clearly constrained themselves, to being in their own lane. And I think like no, 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 like the job is it has to go beyond that now at this point. And with meaning in society, I think that's what's so illuminating with Austrian economics is you can understand like in a very uh cause and effect phenomenologist manner of like why people are feeling isolated in the sense of or meaningless. I think it does have to come back to like the state and what the state how it makes you feel.
Oh yeah. I guess yeah. Your work. You probably like you analyzed Japan is my guess, right?
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's more theoretical, but yeah,
That was me being
a little bit.
racist. I'm sorry. But you analyze prosperous societies that have a suicide problem, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So that would like run antithetical to like your basic economic thought, right? Everybody needs to get more prosperous. The arc of history, right? It's uh, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once the hierarchy of needs is fulfilled, then you move on to the bigger ones. But it seems like
right.
the opposite. Like once these needs are met, there's a lack of meaning and there's a crisis of that, and people feel empty and don't know what to do and are isolated and end up taking that option.
Yeah, I mean, even Mises wrote that like capitalism does not produce happiness. It produces like increased material standards of living and to use the term well-being
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that like you have more wealth and resources and like the ability to have more like favorable leisure and even more favorable laborist conditions. But there's definitely like capitalism does not produce meaning to that extent, right? Just because there's more specialization, you can have all these different surgeries, doesn't mean that like that is the pure happiness is the pure psychological phenomena
Yeah.
of like how do you view yourself in the world.
Oh, and I think communists address this. Oh, this is one thing I thought we'd talk about is Thad is like a dark horse in the libertarian circles in that he takes seriously a lot of leftist thought, especially postmodernism. Um,
Okay.
and I think that that stuff is actually worth reading. Like, if you're a serious person, you should read everything, at least to criticize it and to understand it. Like, you can't really lodge a criticism against something if you haven't tried to understand it first. Uh, but communists, I think, correctly analyze this problem with capitalism is that it doesn't make you happier, and that it leads to isolation, I guess, of the working class, where they don't feel like they have the communist answer to it is they don't feel like they have ownership over what they create, that they feel like it's being exploited by the owners, the ownership class. Uh, and so, but I think they do correctly analyze something wrong with capitalism, something that capitalism can't solve, and that neoliberalism, capitalism is a hell. It's Wally, right? It's yeah, endless WalMarts and people isolated and plugged into VR headsets or whatever. I don't know. Uh, and Eric Fromm was a member of the Frankfurt School, the horrible postmodernist school of thought that allegedly subverted everything in American universities and is responsible for all the worst things. But he talked about a return to feudalism potentially being more satisfying than communism. Oh yeah. Oh
I
sweet,
have
sweet.
his books.
Nice. Yeah.
Trying to read them.
Dope. Dope. But yeah,
Sorry, continue.
he talked about feudalism potentially being better than capitalism and maybe even more implementable than communism because
Hmm.
in feudalism everybody had a place, they had a role, and they knew where they stood. And he starts sounding like Hans Hermann Hoppe and Curtis Yarvin in some ways. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, if you're intellectually curious, you'll see these problems and you'll just find new ways of looking for them.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree to the extent that like capitalism does not provide meaning, but I guess I disagree in that therefore the solution is the abolishment
Oh yeah,
of capitalism.
same.
Um, I do think that like yeah, like I mean, man, I it is fascinating to like try to like for me to like find meaning in life in regards to like if you're not gonna find meaning in what you do, right? If work is just work,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, well, then you dismiss work as your answer for happiness in life, and then like, what does it become? Like family, friends, culture, society, art. Um, so I don't know. Like I don't know the meaning of life, right? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe is that kind of like the question of like Why do we live
Uh
if not to work?
huh. uh, I mean, so this is where religion comes in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, I think it has to. Uh, I think you have to look at yourself as more than just material. Uh, if you want to find happiness, like true happiness, I think anybody who looks at themselves as just material ha- runs up against a wall in some way.
Hmm.
Uh, and the religions of the world have offered different answers to that. And I'm, uh, I don't want to, I don't like publicly talking about religion in a way that sounds like I'm advocating for a religion. Uh,
Okay.
but I think the story of Jesus and Jesus himself, like, if you take by faith that he rose from the dead and conquered death and modeled a way to treat each other in the face of the worst oppression, that he showed you how you should behave when things are at their absolute worst, like you're being crucified by the state and all of your friends betrayed you. I think that's that's an answer to the hardest questions. And I don't think there's like a scientific way to prove it, but I think if you take that hypothesis on faith and behave in a certain way that Jesus modeled, uh, you can find fulfillment. I think you can find fulfillment in other religions too. But I was raised Catholic um, in my teenage years, and I parted from the church because I didn't feel like there was any magic happening. Like I didn't feel like any supernatural thing was actually happening. It felt very routine and material. And but as I got older, I realized it was a code of morality that was instilled upon me at an early age, and it was a series of traditions that I should be grateful for. Uh,
Mm.
uh, I still have, I'm not fully taking communion every week, but I think, when it comes to the hardest questions, you have to go there. I think it's the only thing that offers an answer at the very least.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I really like that. There are
Mhm.
aspects of religion I don't like so much, but as far as that finding meaning
Uh-huh.
and I really
Yeah,
like
because
that.
like I had a period like everybody does, I think, of checking out Zen Buddhism and checking out Taoism and all that. But that's all about like being in accordance with nature, and that doesn't really tackle the issue of evil.
Right.
It doesn't like really address. There are people who want to like inflict serious harm on others, who want to destroy, and make everything worse for everyone else. And what should you do then? It doesn't really address that at all. It just,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's more like a mode rather than like a meaning.
Hmm. There's a lot of ways, yeah. There's a lot of great things you can get from it, but I don't think it cuts at deeper existential
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. I think you're right. Um, huh. Uh, well, we can veer from
Hmm.
religion if you like.
Sure.
Um, what I guess where would you like to take this back to
Oh,
or towards?
um, shoot. Maybe more about myth making and history, because that's just what I've been thinking about a lot this last week.
Yeah.
And there's protests going on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there actually, if you paid attention unreported, I said there wasn't one here, but there actually was at Indiana University, and it got shut down by the police. I don't think the protest itself was that big, but I think the police shut it down because the board of trustees didn't want it to be something bigger. They didn't want it to be like other national protests happening. They wanted to shut it down before it turned into something bigger.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I guess the myth of the civil rights movement. Um, man, I hate to like go against these like third rails that you can never touch. Oh, shoot, you're asking me about like what I thought about the history of the country and whatnot. This is a big thing
Hmm.
too. Is our foundational myths like boomers and everybody support entitlements. Like they always talk about how the United States will never be a socialist nation and all that. But the third rail of politics is these widely popular entitlement programs that are heavily, heavily socialist. And it would be cruel to discontinue them now, immediately. Like a lot of people would be without the resources they need to survive. But on the aggregate, these programs make the world worse for everybody.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like
and
Social Security and
Social
and
Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all that.
yeah.
Um, there's
Yeah.
no, that's just another reason why I see national politics as hopeless, is because that's where the vast majority of money is spent on. It keeps our citizens dependent on the government. They're widely popular. I don't think there's any way to convince anybody. I don't think there's a wide way of convincing people not to support those programs because their livelihoods at this point depend on it. Uh, so the political route is hopeless for me from there. If you want the world to be more free and less socialist, and you want to keep more of your money and you want your money to be worth something.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think you're right in that aspect. I what do you think about this? Like, because my professor said that like, most people in history become obsolete, and I think with a monetary revolution, like there's going to be people who don't receive social security or Medicare or Medicaid, and it's like, what do you do with those people, whether they feel entitled and are or are not? Like, I don't know. How do you think about that?
I think you have to pay people what they're owed, what they were promised. I think that's on the government to do that. I think it's, yeah, any sort of addendum to those systems, they'd have to be phased out to where anybody born into the systems gets paid what they're owed.
But what if they can't afford to pay people?
uh, which is what we're coming up on real soon.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I mean, hyperinflation is the only thing you can resort to, like in practical
Yeah.
terms. Just inflate the currency and yeah,
Um, what are the likelihoods, do you think, of that?
pretty likely if the system continues, which is why you have to transition to sounder money, and then hopefully
Uh-huh.
the transition to sound money uh, makes sound policy inevitable. It makes it a must. Uh,
Uh-huh. And how destructionist would hyperinflation in this country be? This is really getting dark and
yeah,
pessimistic.
I think I think I don't see grocery shelves being empty. I just see the World Economic Forum future of you will own nothing and you will be happy happening, where sustenance and like I think grocery stores will still be packed, but I don't think anybody will be able to own a home or even own a car. Um, I don't think people will be able to own anything. I think they'll just be able to buy their cheap plastic crap from China and buy their GMO foods with with the devalued currency, and then things like houses and things like cars and things that are actual property of value are just going to be way beyond their reach.
Huh. Well, I really hope that doesn't happen. I feel like we could shift to a sounder money, even
Mm-hmm.
if a central bank digital currency, like say like the government's pushed that, and that
Yeah,
was the next adoption. I don't think that's a long-term sustainable
Oh,
thing either.
yeah. Well, it starts with the individual.
Okay.
Uh, like saving the world or whatever starts with the individual. I think it's possible for a middle class person to save and buy a house at some point in their life. I think if they invest regularly in sound money or in appreciating assets, they can do that with the rapidly inflating currency that they're given. They
Hmm.
just need to invest in something that's going to uh, appreciate, yeah, faster than the dollar, and then I think there will be a housing crash at some point to where the prices will go back down. I don't think that can go on forever, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I, man, I see what you're saying with like the hyperinflation and like grocery stores being packed but just being really expensive. I
Hmm.
feel like I don't know. I would just like to think that that would turn people to be like very anti-government to the point where the government would have to like change itself.
Yeah, I'm a little pessimistic on convincing people about economics because it requires high level abstract thinking to say,
Well, I mean, not even that you need to convince people, but like take Argentina and
oh
Malay,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like I think that would hopefully be the kind of direction that America would go, where it doesn't have to go full hyperinflation like Argentina, but then like people,
hmm,
someone like a Malay coming in and just being like, guys, this was caused by the central bank.
yeah. Again, I think entitlements are too popular because like until entitlements are gotten rid of, you can't address a central bank until you have to stop promising that the government will take care of everybody forever in order to stop printing money forever.
So
So,
the boomer conservatives have become what we feared,
yeah,
the socialists.
yeah.
Wow.
Literally, like, follow your most conservative uncle's Facebook page, and they will say, America will never be a socialist nation. And then, they better not touch my Social Security and Medicare in the same
Yeah.
sentence. Or, you better not sell your house in my neighborhood because that'll take the price down and for mine. We all need to, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. The conservative socialism, as Hoppe has written about. Man, uh that's just well, hopefully like something like national divorce could happen so then states will be able to like, you know, re um reconstruct their economies based
Yeah.
off of sounder money.
And I think national divorce can become appealing to liberals too. This is the case I always make is like the reason why we don't have Obamacare is because we have our bloated federal medical system as it already exists. That's impossible to implement a single payer thing on top of that. And if you want single payer, you could probably accomplish it with your states. And if you got rid of federal entitlements and all the federal taxes that go to that, and the states enforce that on their own, they could probably come up with a viable single payer option for their citizens if that's what they want.
Mm.
So if you see the federal government as dead weight and a regressive thing of the past, I think you can convince liberals to get on board with, yeah, national divorce.
Yeah, I mean, now you really got me thinking because, like, as I was in DC, like, I was walking around looking at these, these institutions, these buildings, the Treasury, the White House, and it's like you can tell they're not just old, but they don't have the magical special quality that I feel like they probably used to appear to have.
Oh yeah.
Um, so so it's like I don't think we need to go through this like this Maoist revolution of like hyperinflation and a central bank digital currency because we don't need to be that nationalistic. Like we
Hmm.
can just all go our separate way and like I think that creates the game theory of like certain states and mayors would want to like succeed to the point of,
Hmm.
you know, seceding.
Yeah, yeah. Ugh. But again, I still have a patriotism that like sees in the same way that Brian McClanahan and Tom Woods, for example, do that nullification and you know states' rights and federalism is the American tradition, and that's what you should take pride in. Uh, so I
Which
think,
is in line with national divorce, right?
yeah, it is. It is for the national divorce to happen. I think you need to, yeah, have an understanding of that. I think, at least for the conservatives. I think the liberals might have some sort of strain of revolutionary socialism or something where they just say, fuck it, we'll move on and we can do whatever we want without you.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it is interesting how kind of diverse the cities within states are
Oh,
between
yeah.
being liberal and conservative, and so like, like how does that separation occur? What does it look like? Is very interesting. But man, now I'm only more optimistic and bullish on like a monetary revolution, kind of like
Hmm.
from the bottom up, from whether it be mayors or states that are just like, yeah, like we're just gonna, like our people are suffering. We can't buy anything. We need to just change our money, our
Hmm.
monetary system. I think that's more likely to happen. Did you see the Tucker clip where he's like, I met with Klaus Schwab and he's just like not an impressive guy. Like I don't see him running anything.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen that clip, or it doesn't come to mind immediately, but I've heard that argument from Tucker a lot, which Thad says a lot too, that our elites aren't impressive. Like Tucker says that is like he has nothing against elitism, but he just wants our elites to be elite. Like if you're gonna rule over me, you should impress me. Like you should be able to beat me in a game of chess or something.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Um, which is kind of
Hmm.
it's interesting and beautiful that like we're like, and that's like the white pill of Michael Malice is that you know these guys aren't impressive, and
Hmm.
like so don't be deterministic that they will be the ones to rule you, you know?
Hmm. And that's the non-interventionist like creed, I guess, about confronting evil is that evil in and of itself is ontologically destructive and will collapse in on itself. I think,
Hmm.
like to think that there's a threat that's so big that if we don't intervene and stop it somewhere else in the world, that it'll take over the world is to believe that that's a productive system. Like, if you believe the Nazis could have, yeah, if left to their own devices, could have taken over the world, that means that you think that socialism works. That means that you think that jailing your own population and turning them against each other works when it doesn't. It's self-destructive. Uh,
Yeah, I like that.
mhm.
I think that's a good um optimistic point to perhaps conclude on. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, we can stop it here. Yeah.
All right.
Uh,
Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time and your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Yeah. This was
Yeah.